Hello, and you're very welcome to the week that really was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for the week ending the 13th of October 2023. And an eventful week it was. This was the week in Ireland where we had the budget. Normally the biggest week on the political calendar, but that all kind of pales into insignificance in terms of what happened in the Middle East this week. We're going to talk about both those stories and maybe one or two more over the course of the next hour. But Sarah, I'll turn to you first and say hello and how are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Everything kind of since Saturday, everything's kind of paled in significance to the events that are happening around the world, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was saying to somebody earlier on today that kind of, obviously you can't write about the same thing every day. And I write every day for Gript, but it's been quite difficult this week to kind of muster the interest in writing about other things. I mean, I was writing a piece today about the RTE events in the Dáil today for tomorrow. And while I think it's a good piece, my heart wasn't really in it because, like,
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in it seems so piddling and unimportant compared to what's going on in the world at the moment. But we'll come to all that later on. We'd better start by talking about the budget. Are you wealthier?
Um, I think I put it into one of the calculators and it was like a couple of £100 a year, but I do benefit from the um double payment of children's allowance. How does that?
Hmm.
Um, but overall, I mean, I thought that the junior cert books thing was a good idea.
Hmm.
Um, I thought that the meals in schools was a good idea. And I think that it was a good idea. Like I always feel like, I said this last year that like budgets, have kind of two elements to them. And one is the obvious economic element and the like basics of money, but there's also psychological elements to them. And I liked the fact that they didn't give extra money to health because I think it's a good message.
Yeah.
Um, and like that sounds like a completely absurd thing to say given the sheer volume of the budget as it is, but like it's still important. I still, you know what I mean? And then there was a lot of kind of like the media doing this thing of like, oh well, let's get somebody on whose child has been waiting for 15 years for this and talk to them about how they feel about the less budget. But like it's a nonsense because more money has been given year on year on year and it shows that that's not worked. So let's try something different. Do you know what I mean? So I think, I think that that was a good idea. Apart from that, I I thought it was an like real kind of non-event, really.
Yeah, no,
Um,
part of that might have been the wider context that we mentioned at the beginning in terms of the week in which it took place. I think there was.
yeah, for sure. But I also like, I mean, I think that like, you know, the problem is that like with all of the talk and the self-congratulations about how much money we have and how much surplus we have here, whatever, they made a rod for their own back.
Mhm.
And, I think that like ultimately it was kind of a conservative budget that didn't do much of anything for anyone in particular. And so people were kind of grumbling about it. And ultimately there was no banana skins in it, but there was nothing particularly inspired either.
I mean, from my perspective, I was looking at it and I was obviously paying attention to it as it happened. And I want to say I agree with you. And I wrote a piece today. I think the school book scheme is sort of inspired. I think there might be a sting in the tail because I think it gives the state more control over what those books are, and some parents might want to watch out. If they have concerns in that area on certain subjects, but it probably gives the state more control over the curriculum is the side effect. These things never come totally free. But in principle, I thought it was a good move because it's a way of putting money into people's pockets that shouldn't really distort the marketplace because the same number of books can be bought regardless of who pays for them, right? So it's just transferring money back into parents' pockets. And I thought in that respect, as a sort of economic support, a very good and very clever idea.
Yeah.
But I have to say overall, like they spent an additional 14 billion euro. They broke their own budgetary rules. They went beyond the spending limits, and I'm not really sure what they accomplished for the country. I mean, they spent an awful lot of money in an afternoon. Um, I'm not really sure how they spent it. And I don't mean that. I mean, obviously, I can break down, the extra
Yeah.
departments that the extra money is going to, but there isn't a single problem that the country had on Monday that it didn't have on Wednesday. And when I look at government I've talked about this before on the podcast, the lack of imagination is incredible. I mean, I would like to think that were I running the government, and I never will be, thank God for most people, but were I running the government, I would be inclined to say, let's look at a very big problem, muster all these resources and try and solve it. So if I've got 14 billion to spend, let's take 10 billion of it and say we are going to enact an all hands on deck plan to fix housing, for example. Now it might not work, but it would show some imagination to improving the country with the public finances. Whereas I kind of think when I look at the budget that I see Asher just everything tick over, give everyone a few extra quid, hope they remember us when they vote. But the fundamentals of the country aren't changed in return for a vast amount of money being spent. And I think that's sort of depressing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I think, like there's the the school book scheme, like you're right, it's a good idea and all of that, but like in the grand scheme of things, it's a really pretty small amount of money.
Yes.
And, it's one of the leading noteworthy things in the budget, which in and of itself tells you what you need to know about the budget, if you know what I mean. Like it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It should be a kind of a small initiative as part of the overall education budget. That's a kind of a nice story, but not that big of a news story. But it featured heavily because there was, it was a kind of like when you say a kind of a continuity budget, like a budget that kind of just keeps things ticking along. But like I said, if you've told everyone how well we're doing and how much spare money there is knocking around, can you really do that politically? Is that a smart thing to do? And I think that they gave the opposition a lot of, fodder to complain about, and
Mm.
they needn't have, do you know?
Yeah, although the opposition complaints were mainly that I saw of the nature of all opposition complaints for every budget, which is we would have spent more and taxed less and made everyone better off.
Well,
And
obviously,
like there's I think the country I've thought for some time now that I'm obviously not going to pretend to be some sort of mega fan of this government, but I actually think the bigger problem in the country is opposition and the lack of it. And not the lack of opposition because there's opposition there, but the lack of any intelligent opposition. Like we saw during COVID, where the opposition was basically like, whatever you're doing, do it 10 times more. On climate change, whatever you're doing, do it 10 times more. I mean, the opposition in this country sort of amounts to we would do the same stuff as the government, only harder. And when you look around the political sphere, and by the political sphere, I mean the people who are likely to form the next government. Obviously, there are some people out there with good ideas. I'm not going to include Michael McDowell, for example, in what I'm saying here.
yeah,
But when you look around the political sphere at the opposition and say, where is your alternative vision for the country that isn't just spending more money? It's not there.
yeah. I mean, no, I listened to Louise Riley, or is it Louise O'Reilly from Sinn Féin, and you almost could have scripted like they for opposition, they seem tired. Do you know?
Yeah,
Like you could have scripted what she was going to say before she even came on. And then there was a couple of times she said things, and I'm not quoting her, but the gist of what she said was, well, they've just taken a Sinn Féin idea and kind of ran with it. And it's like, then how are you still moaning about it? Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of like, and I think, and again, like it kind of goes without saying that I'm not a Sinn Féin fan or whatever, but I think Louise O'Reilly is, quite bright and like, she's a, I
very
don't
good,
know her,
very good media performer,
but
whatever
she's a
else.
very good media performer, and she's kind of she's kind of respect like why do she kind of I have a bit of respect for her. She stands up for herself. She's kind of good, and she's a strong media performer, as you say. And I thought she was kind of weak because she felt, and so did some of the other Sinn Féin people who were on different things that I saw. They seem kind of tired. Like these are guys who are supposedly preparing themselves to govern.
Yep.
Like you don't feel that energy. Now, you don't feel that energy from anybody else either. And they're kind of, so you're right that they're kind of getting away with it for that reason. Everyone in there is tired. But like, it was all a bit like these speeches could have been written 3 weeks ago and they still would have had the same content before they'd even seen the budget.
Yeah, and the other thing that depresses me is like I think if you had a Sinn Féin, Labour, Social Democrat government, for argument's sake, delivering this budget with a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael opposition, I don't think there'd have been much different in it. I
Yeah.
really don't. I think it would have been the same budget, and we'd be listening to this. We'd be listening to people moaning about it, except they'd have, there'd be the Fine Gaelers and the Fianna Fáilers moaning about it. Like the thing is that the political system is so consensual now, so consensus based that
Hmm.
there's really not that much there to get excited about. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
put another 4 billion into some climate change fund.
And
Who
I
gives
don't think that I don't think that that we said this before, that whole scaring, oh, if Sinn Féin get in, all the businesses will leave. I just don't think that really works anymore.
a-
Um, do you
yeah,
know what I mean? Like, I just don't think that like people really buy that as much anymore. It's not enough of a reason for a lot of people I know to not vote Sinn Féin, unfortunately. But like, it's all a bit consensus based, as you say, and it doesn't really feel like anymore like that much would be different, and that's a really big problem for the likes of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
mm,
By the way, when we were discussing last week, was it the poll that came out? We completely forgot to mention the social. And I had
did
a
we?
couple of people say it to me. They were like, "You guys discussed a poll and you didn't even." And I was like, "I'm pretty sure that we both forgot that the Social Democrats existed," which is so bad, but like so telling.
To be fair, I think either 94 or 96% of the respondents to that poll also forgot to mention the Social
Touche,
Democrats.
touche.
But we're
But
not alone.
it was interesting because um I didn't now I'm sure obviously she did, but like I didn't like notice anything groundbreaking from their leader on the budget, and the polling that bounce that they got when she became leader is now gone. And was that just a kind of a flash in the pan thing, or what's going on, do you think?
I think it was she's a good-looking young woman. And she's fresh and she's a new face. And God, we want a fresh new face. I think that's what it was. But she hasn't really capitalized on that momentum. Like there's been no sort of social democrat vision for the country because the social democrat vision for the country is just the Labour vision for the country, it's just the Sinn Féin vision for the country, it's just the Green Party vision for the country. So there's no. I mean, I think people out there are genuinely looking for something different. Not necessarily people say, "Oh, it's McGurk or the new party in the centre right again." No, they're just looking for something different. Could be on any flank of politics, but something that sounds different, something that appears to have sort of fresh ideas, something that has a bit of energy. And I look at Holly Cairns and I don't see a whole lot of energy. I mean, she doesn't convey it when she speaks. When she speaks in the Dáil, she often comes across as a backbencher reading script that somebody else has written for her. And I'm sorry that you can get away with that as a backbencher, but I don't think you can as a party leader. I think you have to be seen to be somebody with your own ideas and ability to convey them. So I just think people were initially interested in something new, something exciting, and then found that it wasn't particularly new or particularly exciting. That's my theory.
Well, it was pretty short-lived. I mean, even in political terms, that was only how long is she there now?
Maybe 8 months, something like that. I think it was.
Oh, is it that long? Okay.
Yeah, no, she's been there a while. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that if you're listening, but it's longer than 6 months anyway.
Well, it just feels very reminiscent of the Ivana Bacik thing as well, that it's like this big, huge, great white hope thing, and then it just fizzes away. And I'd love to know what the phenomenon is there. Like, is it that you want to be leader of the party and then you realize, then you go into the kind of weeds on organizational stuff, or is it that, the journey is more interesting to the media and then they kind of lose interest in you once you're there? I just think it's the second time now in a year or two that this seems to be happening, where there's a bounce and then it just all fades away. And that's, I don't
Well,
know.
the Social Democrats and Labour shouldn't be two parties. That's the first thing. Because, I mean, they are functionally identical in every respect. I mean,
Mhm.
what are the differences between the two parties? I mean, you could probably point to some policy paper somewhere that's slightly different on drug criminalization or something like that.
Ah, yeah, but nobody in the public actually cares about
Yeah,
them.
no, nobody cares. I mean, they are functionally the same. Vote one is purple, the other is red, but they both do the same thing. Um, so there's no differentiation on either of their behalf. And they're also, by the way, both functionally identical to the Green Party. Those three parties exist in the same space in Irish politics, exchange voters at different elections. For the next election, a lot of people who voted Green will go Labour or Social Democrat or something further to the left because they're disillusioned with the Greens. And then the election after that, a lot of them will flow back to the Greens. That's just, it's that section of the electorate that's maybe 10, 12% of people who want to vote for the soft left.
Yeah,
Um, and there's no interest in those parties outside of that 10 to 11% of the electorate. Um, and a lot of those people who vote for them work in journalism, by the way. So they get disproportionate attention as well.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Um,
like I mean, obviously, I have my, everyone has their own circles or whatever, but I have circles of friends who come from all different types of political viewpoints, and I've never had anybody talk to me about the Social Democrats.
no, you're not going to. I suspect. I mean, I think she's Holly Kearns is a very presentable person, but I just think the issue there isn't the presentation; it's the content. It's just it's very bland. What are you going to get that's different? And Sinn Féin, I think, are being very successful because the one thing that they offer, which is a bit different, is the whiff of sulphur and the whiff of cordite. Putting them into office feels like making a big change and feels like kicking the system really hard because of their past and their background. But it doesn't necessarily. They're also at the same time now safe enough that you can go for the kind of feel of doing something really big and rebellious without actually shaking the system up too much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of that about. Although I thought, speaking of the whiff of sulfur and cordite, because we might as well talk about it.
I knew that you were going to do that segue there. I knew.
Yeah, but I think Sinn Féin's an interesting place to start
Yeah, it is.
because their performance this week has been bizarre. I mean, as little children were being gunned down in the south of Israel, the Ogre Sinn Féin account was tweeting a picture of a Palestinian flag with a fist in the middle of it. We had various Sinn Féin accounts tweeting things like "Glory to the Palestinian resistance" as women were being carted away on the backs of trucks. Um, and then by the middle of the week, when the extent of the atrocities became fairly bad, you had Mary Lou McDonald condemning Hamas on Radio 1. So obviously they're no longer as committed to the Palestinian cause absolutely as they were last week. Like it's a fascinating example in real time of how that party um, is, I think, over time, slowly trying to ditch its base of activists who are still the same people they were in 2000, 2001.
Well, they still have little Chrissy Andrews, remember him with the fake Twitter account?
Yes.
He's still like flying the flag for that, but I don't know. I mean, I think that, this I was I was pleasantly surprised to see Mary Robinson come out and say these are war crimes. This, and to suggest otherwise is a mistake. Like it's nothing to do with like what side you're on or whatever. There's a level of anti-human behavior that's just grim. I had to I really found this week to be heavy going on the mental health if you spent any time on social media. Between the depression of people just like absolutely ripping each other to shreds because one's calling the other a Nazi and one's calling the other pro-Israel or whatever they are, and then just the sheer volume of horror and videos and whatever. There was just days this week I gave it a rest, to be honest.
I sympathize with you on that one. I mean, I was close to doing the same myself. I did something I very rarely do, which was I put a flag in my social media profile. I didn't do that for Ukraine, didn't do it during COVID, any of that stuff. But I really did feel, given the brutality of the attack and the brutality of some of the responding on social media, I thought it was important to show my colors, as it were, even though
Hmm.
they're not my colors. I think it's important to say that. I mean, I'm no fan of what the Israeli government does with illegal settlements in the West Bank, for example. I think it's just flat wrong what they do there.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and I before this week, I would have said that while I'm a great friend of Israel, been there, visited the country, think it's a great place. I would
Yeah.
have said that from time to time their security measures are heavy-handed. But I think this week we saw why. I mean, these people talk about, oh, Gaza is an open air prison. What they mean by that is that it's walled off from the rest of Israel with a 10-foot high security fence and there's only two crossings people can go through. This week we found out why. You know, if you are an Israeli citizen living in southern Israel, near the border, you need that fence because the moment it comes down, as we saw this week, this is what happens. Um, and to I mean, even if you are somebody listening to this who's still pro-Palestinian, if what happened last Friday didn't give you some understanding of why the Israelis take the security approach they do, then nothing will. I mean, and the other thing that really offends me, by the way, is this reverse racism against Palestinians that gets thrown out all the time, which is, oh, they were driven to it. I saw somebody this week say that it's the equivalent of the Japanese internment camps that the Americans set up in World War II. Do you remember those?
Hmm.
Where Japanese citizens were rounded up and interned. And it's desperate. They're kept in open air prisons and they're not allowed to move around and their human rights are abused. Well, do you know what the difference is? Nobody in a Japanese internment camp broke out and murdered loads of people in the American farmland around them. And to suggest that the inevitable reaction of human beings to being in that situation is to become murderous and to murder their fellow human beings and to murder babies in that way. So it is to me a form of racism that suggests that people can't control themselves, that there's no hope. These people, I mean, the same people are upset that the Israelis referred to Hamas as animals, saying it was dehumanizing language. I think it's dehumanizing when you suggest that it's utterly inevitable that the people in Gaza are going to act in a murderous and barbaric way towards their Israeli neighbors.
Or
And
that,
they,
or raping, like that's part of the, like, should be viewed in the wider context or whatever. Like that kind of talk is just, I mean, God, it's amazing how much the woke stuff slips away and how fast it slips away when when stuff like this happens. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I just feel I also, give gave a huge amount of thought this week equally to the, people who are, in Gaza who are going to get absolutely annihilated by Israel. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's nothing to do with who I think or what I think, but there's just a level to some of this that was just so violent. It was scary. It was like, Game of Thrones level, stuff. And like, I know people will say, attack us and say, oh, well, this happened before and whatever. But like, we surely can all agree that it's all a horror show. You know what I mean? Like,
it is. It is all a horror show. But I mean, like, peace takes two sides. It needs two sides. I
yeah,
mean, I saw somebody today say, Israel should withdraw to its 1948 borders, which, I mean, first of all, you know, that would not be acceptable because the reason Israel expanded its 1948 borders was because when it was in those borders in 1948, all its Arab neighbors attacked it at once in an attempt to wipe it off the face of the earth and get rid of the Jews occupying the Holy Land
yeah,
when they were within those borders. So those borders didn't grant them security. There's this idea that Israel withdraws from way back to an unsustainable point of view and uproots millions of its citizens to do that, then there'll be peace. No, there won't. I mean, you have to go back 50 years to show that that wasn't acceptable either.
mm,
Um, so, I mean, a lot of it, but the thing that really bothers me is the way people, and it's a very bad disease in Ireland, they assume that only one side has responsibility for ending the conflict. So they shout about how Israel has cut off the power and water into Gaza. Brutal. Wouldn't have been my way of fighting a war, I have to say, but that's what they did. But Israel has also said that they will turn those back on again the moment the hostages that were taken by Hamas are returned. And yet I haven't seen one Irish politician who's taking a sort of Israel is the big bad approach, say Hamas should return those hostages.
yeah.
Hasn't happened. Won't happen. Because
But
only one side is accountable in Ireland for its actions.
but do you not think as well? And like, I'm the same as you. Like, I've been to Israel and like loved it, and like I, but I would never for a moment consider myself to be anywhere even close to an expert or on this conflict. Because I think it's very complicated and very long. And I think that there's more than any other issue in the world, I feel like this conflict is something that a huge amount of Irish people, me, I've been growing up in the last, 15 years or so, people my age who think they're some kind of expert on this and who have an unbelievably like incorrect view of the entire thing and are, like I've felt for a long time. And I remember having this conversation with my dad a few times where I felt very strongly that, real anti-Semitism is one of the last acceptable forms of racism in people of my age. And I've seen it with my own eyes over the years. And it's just kind of like, yeah, well, it's okay because I disagree. I think that there's a huge amount of couch experts or whatever that term is on this conflict. And if you actually speak to them for a couple of minutes and ask a couple of questions or delve into it, they actually don't really know what they're talking about at all.
Yeah, and by the way, there's a huge anti-Semitism problem on the right. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, just go look at my social media replies this week. I mean, somebody. I mean, there are very intelligent people who will write to me and say I'm wrong on various issues, and very very intelligent people have written to me this week to say I'm wrong on this issue and
Mm.
take explained their pro-Palestinian position in sort of thoughtful and humane terms, and I respect that immensely. But then there are the others.
They're also right about loads of it. This is the thing. They're right about loads of things.
Yeah,
They're just not right about everything.
yeah. Nor am I, nor are you.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
nature of being human. But then
Yeah.
there are the others. There are the people who come into your replies, who start talking about the Rothschilds, who start talking about Jewish control of banks and
Yeah.
Jewish control of the media, and they're out there, and they're out there in quite large numbers. I saw somebody who I previously respected this week respond to the European flag being posted, sorry, the Israeli flag being posted on the European Parliament with a tweet asking who controls the banks, who controls the media. This is somebody who I thought was a relatively sound person, somebody I've met. Um, it's out there and it's rampant. And I think on the right sometimes it shows its face more directly because on the left they cloak it in languages of oppression and hierarchies of oppression and who the privileged are and who the privileged aren't and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But
And I mean, I think that there's both, like both sides have it. And I think there's also, like lots of people who are extremely passionately pro-Palestine who aren't anti-Semitic at all. They're just, this is their thing and that's fine. But I don't know. I just think like it's also, you can still be extremely passionately pro-Palestine and still have, compassion and like an awareness that there is a group of people who are hurting. I mean, like I said, like I just had to stop watching, even up like today, like just like the news, Sky News, I had it on in the kitchen, like interview after interview with people whose families have been wiped out or who are watching a mobile phone of a loved one pinging in from this middle of Gaza, hoping that their kids might be with, like, you know what I mean? Like horror. Like I said to Keith, like literally a type of hell this is. And that doesn't mean like you can just sit for a moment and say, you know what I mean? Like I was driving on Monday, my kids do swimming classes on a Monday, which they absolutely hate, and Monday is just hell. I have to drive them, they scream, they don't want to go. It's a nightmare. And I remember I was just like, I'm losing the plot driving along in the car or whatever. And all of a sudden I was just like, I just thought like there's people in the world right now who give anything to be arguing with their kids about swimming lessons.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? And like I can like feel that very like deeply in my soul as a mother of three children without having to like agree with anything that anybody else has ever done. And I just think that when people get so caught up in being right and being on the right side of things, they forget about that.
I mean, some of the stuff that struck me this week, there's been a lot of deep unpleasantness online, but very few people are online. So,
Mm.
you can write that off as a sort of madness that infects people on the internet. So there was stuff about there was that awful saga all week about whether or not babies were beheaded. And
Yeah.
some people who seem to take the view that if the babies were simply shot, then
Yeah, I know.
what are you on about? They didn't behead them; they only shot the babies. That kind of weirdness. But what struck me was the scale of the vileness that happened offline. We had the scenes in Australia of a large gang of people standing outside the Sydney Opera House chanting "Gas the Jews," and you didn't see the video from London of the
Of the woman. Yeah.
woman going around sticking her
Yeah.
phone in people's faces if she suspected they were Jewish, asking them if their boys were dead. Good, good.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing, there was a tweet from one of the stars of what's that program, Stranger Things, who's a young Jewish child actor who posted something about Israel, and why he was standing with them as an American Jew, and there were like 49,000 quote tweets, the overwhelming majority of which were utterly vile, and all of them seem to come. And I'm just noticing this here. All of them seem to come from young women in their 20s or teens. Like there was a degree to which vileness became acceptable this week. Um, and it's very unsettling. I mean, if you compare it to 9/11, for example, the reactions are incredibly different. And it's not a bad comparison because there are a lot of people who would have said in the years leading up to 9/11 that American foreign policy was hugely misguided in much of the world, and there was a cause and effect. That was an argument you could make. But it wasn't made the week after the attack with the kind of joy that some people were taking in both the real world and the internet with the fact that this has happened. I think that's very unsettling. I think it's deeply unsettling.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's been a week where I've felt a little bit shaken by it, I have to say. Even though it happened on the other side of Europe and didn't affect me, I have felt shaken by it, because I just think the world and civic discourse is in a bad place at the moment.
Yeah. And I think, like at the end of the day, like, people will get caught up in politics and talking about this and talking about that. But then really like 99.9% of the time, if you sit down with another human being and you talk to them, the things that matter to them are their family, their children, their husband or wife or whatever. And so, like you can get caught up in a kind of like all of the noise around this, but the fundamentals are there that like this is a huge like annihilation of humanity, of children, of like treatment of human beings that is just, and on both sides. And it's something that will, this is going to, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know what the plan is here. I don't know how it's going to end. Like you can't, there doesn't seem, Israel don't seem to have any kind of plan really far beyond just vengeance. Like I don't know where this will go or end, but it will, it'll be in history books as, like a really horrific event that has happened. And as
What
you said, babies beheaded or babies, like, you know, I mean, are we really, like,
to put it in context, Israel has 8 million people and 1,200 people were killed last weekend. Can you imagine if, I mean, the
so
equiv
hard, man. Like,
the
let's be honest.
yeah,
That's only, yeah,
so far, but the equivalent would be if at the height of the Troubles, the UVF or the UDA had sent busloads of gunmen across the border into the Republic and killed 800 or 900 citizens, including children, on a particular day. I mean, the you know it's some people compare it to the Northern Irish conflict, but I mean nothing on this scale ever happened here. It's almost unprecedented. In
and
terms of that.
it's just getting started, really. I mean, like I said, like what's going to happen now? What's going to happen for the next week, 2 weeks, 6 months? God knows. This will be the 1,200 or whatever. The death toll will be monstrous.
It will, and on both sides, we should say that because there are a lot of
Of course, on both sides.
there are 2 million people in Gaza. It's a very small area. It's not much bigger than sort of if you draw a line people from this neck of the woods will know if you sort of draw a line out from Dundalk and down as far as Drogheda and back in, that's roughly the size of the Gaza Strip. It's a very small area of land with 2 million people in it. They don't
And
have that
there's
place to go.
and
But
there's and there's a lot of, already, and will be more, like, children in Gaza who will die, for like innocent people will die from Israelis. You know what I mean? Like, so, like, the whole thing is just a horror show, and it's not. There was things I was saying to Keith earlier on, like when the war broke out in the Ukraine, there was things on social media that and it felt like really particularly violent. Like there was videos of this and that, and I never, I never watch any of that stuff. I was exposed to or partially exposed to one of those beheading videos when I was a teenager from, Iraq or somewhere, and or Afghanistan, and I was traumatized enough, so I never watch anything like that. But I remember thinking that, the scale of violence in the Ukraine seemed like really, like very, very high. And this is just on another level.
exactly. I mean, as bad as the Russians are, and they're pretty bad, they've never been accused of anything like this. Um, but is Islamic terrorism is on another level. I mean, in terms of the beheading children thing, I'll just note that a couple of years ago in Syria, when ISIS were fighting the Syrian government, I don't know whether it was ISIS or one of the rebel groups that the Americans armed that were fighting against ISIS, but like there were children as young as 5 beheaded in public for crimes, and this was recorded, and the video footage is out there. Um, and I mean, it is something that happens. I mean, the idea that it's beyond the pale or nothing that bad could have happened, somebody would have had to make it up. I mean, it has happened in the past. That's important to note. I mean, ISIS, Hamas, all those groups, they operate off the same rough sense of the world. So if you think the tales of horror are overblown, probably aren't paying enough attention.
Oh God, I don't want to pay any more attention than I already am. Like, it's just, I think that, like, it's, I mean, I know that seems cowardly, but sometimes I just think, like, because I think, like, I have 3 children, and I think really, sometimes I just have to, like, turn it off and say the only power I have in the world is the lives of the 3 children that I have in my house, and I can't think about it too much because it just is so distressing.
Hmm.
And I know they'll say, "Oh, don't turn away," and you should look. But this week has really tested my mettle on that front, to put it that way.
Well, look, we've talked it through as much as we can. So you were telling me beforehand, because I'll tell you something, there was something in the news this week I didn't pay much attention to, which you were telling me you paid attention to, which is the Tina Satchwell case, where the cops seem to have made a breakthrough after 3 or 4 years. It seems fairly significant.
Well, in fairness now, and we would we wouldn't be shy about criticizing the Gardaí, but to be fair, so Tina Satchel went missing in 2017. So what are we now? 2023. So 6 years ago.
Hmm.
And the Gardaí have just, like, obviously not at the time. Her husband went out. He didn't he didn't um go to the police and say she was missing for 4 days because, well, for reasons kind of not that have never been really clear, but he thought that she'd gone to visit family, she hadn't, or whatever. And her cards were never used. He said that there was money missing, but her passport was never used, blah blah blah. He did a couple of interviews, the Late Late Show and a couple of other things. And he was open about the fact that he said that the police suspected him, but that it was absolutely nothing to do with him. And he the Gardaí have, like, clearly been relentless for the last few years, and really, like, interviewed over 400 people, or interviewed over 170 people, and followed all these lines of inquiry. And basically, they're from Youghal, and a property in Youghal was sealed off on Tuesday, and there was forensic people there or whatever. And then a body was removed today, I think, and a man has been arrested. So
He's been
um
released without charge, though, we should say that.
But a man was released without charge, but then arrested again, was my understanding. Is that not right?
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll go
Um,
with your understanding.
no, I could be wrong. But um, anyway, in fairness to them, like, we would criticize them about different things, but they've really, done their overwhelming here, and they seem to have chased down a conclusion for her family. And God love them, like her family have been relentless in releasing statements over the last 6 years and saying, like that she's still missing. And um um yeah, I just checked it there, and a man was arrested today. So um anyway, so for her family, hopefully they'll get some closure. And well, obviously we have to wait and see what happens, but if there was some kind of foul play involved, it just seems likely. If there's a body that's been buried on a property, that she gets some kind of justice, but like closure for her family at the very least, because I just think there's a form of torture for people in never knowing.
Hmm.
Um, and like fair play to the Gardaí, they seem to have chased it down.
In fairness to the Guardi, they are very good actually with cold cases. I mean, they did solve one earlier on this year, and forgive me, I can't remember the lady's name, but a lady who was murdered, I think, in the late 1980s, and they finally brought her killer to justice um, earlier this year. I think that's something that really speaks well to them, because over the last few years, there have been a number of these cold cases that they've suddenly gotten new leads on and brought people to justice. I mean, I think the Gardaí, uh, I'll say this, I think they're probably our best public service. I think the difficulty with them is how they're used. I mean, they haven't been used to police large parts of Dublin when they should have been. There's been a shortage of members. There's a there's a focus in the Oireachtas for whatever reason on getting them to investigate things that I really don't think are within their purview, like who's attending what protest or what people are saying about transgender people on the internet. But when it comes to the actual major crimes, they do tend to get results, and they do tend to stick with investigations for the long haul.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, Graham Dwyer, for example, was convicted on, I mean, if you actually like looked at that case, like the improbability of him being caught was huge. And he was only caught because a detective just like pretty much wouldn't let it go. And then there was this low watermark because of a lack of rainfall, and the victim's keys were found just by this detective. Like, you know what I mean? It was like a series of things, but it was like just proper good old fashioned police work that made that, that made him get caught. So to be fair, you're right. Like there's some good work there, and good detective work, and like how they're used, and where they're utilized, and their kind of public persona takes a hit because of things that are beyond their control. But when it comes to detective work like this, to be fair, like credit where credit's due. I think that they're doing good work, and this is a good example of it.
yeah, no doubt there. So anything else happened this week that caught your eye?
Not really. I mean, there was plenty to be doing, and not a lot of good news. Like not a
Yeah,
lot of to be positive about this week, unfortunately. I was just
despite your tax cuts and your extra children's allowance at Christmas, which you're
my
very welcome, by the way. I'm obviously paying some of that, even though I don't get any of it, being childless as I am. So you're welcome.
yeah. Well, I
Um,
think that for a lot of people, like, and like I'm not in this bracket myself, thankfully, but there's a lot of people who really, 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 really struggle with Christmas.
yeah,
And, that extra money before Christmas for a lot of people. And I know that people talk about means testing children's allowance and all that, but sometimes people are a lot less wealthy than they look, if you know what I mean. And I think that, there's people who have tracker mortgages that have gone up, and who have, like they look like they're kind of wealthy, and their cash flow isn't great. So
yeah.
I think that it's like it's a good, for people to get that extra money in the lead up to Christmas, and, spend it on their kids, hopefully. And like I'm all for that. I think
Well, this is why if I was in the government, I would not have given anyone a tax cut. Um, and let me finish that before I sound like Scrooge. I would have given them a tax rebate instead. I would have said, rather than giving you €800 over the course of a year in your paycheck, at whatever that is, 20 quid a week, whatever it works out at over the course of a full year, we're going to send you a check for €800 in the first week of January, your tax back. I mean, we already do that. There's a procedure for getting your tax back if you've overpaid it.
Yeah.
I think that should have. I think I would do it that way. I think you get more votes. I think it would make your tax revenue as a state more stable, and I think it would make much more difference to people's lives if at that time of year, whether straight before or straight after Christmas, my preference would be straight after, because I think from my experience, I think a lot of people's experience, January is worse because you kind of don't mind if you're spending money in the lead up to Christmas because it's a time of good cheer. But I don't know why government doesn't send people out a check in January saying this is what you got from the budget. Here it all is in one go. Pay off your credit card bill. Put it to the fact that you're skint because payday is until the 31st of January, which is the day of the year that never seems to come. Um, I think that's what I would have done. But this is what I mean when I think politicians don't have imagination sometimes.
I mean, you say you're never going to be in government, John, but when you talk like that, it seems like a shame to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I just feel like, go, why not go for it? Like, time the check to come a week before a general election.
I mean, you could do that too. I mean, I think that's a bit too blatant for the old electioneering, but you could always contrive to suddenly have the doll fall apart in February after people have gotten their checks, which you announced the year before, you know? So
Yeah.
I mean, there are ways of doing that. But I think the government that did that would make people feel that it did more for them in a single go than the same government that gave them a bigger tax cut over the course of every week. Because I think this is the thing. I mean, when I say that they spent 14 billion and accomplished not much of anything, is that you don't really. I think at the risk of sounding horrendously privileged, because I'm sure there are people out there for whom the extra 10 or 20 quid a week can make a huge difference, and more power to those people. But I think for the kind of middle class people who the government relies on to vote for it, I just don't think, especially a family with two or three kids, I don't think 20 quid a week goes a whole way towards making their lives significantly different. I mean, if I'm massively out of touch on that, tell me in the comments and I'll apologize next week. But I that's what I think.
I think for some of them, I mean, there's no universal thing there. I think for some of them it does, and some of them it doesn't. But I don't think that it's, like meaty enough to inspire anybody, if you know what I mean. Like, I think that the summit will matter for it, and great. But if 20 quid extra a week really matters to people, well, then it should have been more.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like, and as you say, in the form of a check or in the form of other things. But, you know, as I like said before, and I'll say it again, like if you're talking about surpluses and, being awash with money and the tax take being way more than was expected, then don't be surprised that people get irritated when they seem to be still struggling the same after the budget as they were before it.
Yeah. And I mean, we haven't mentioned all the things that are going up in price. I mean, fuel went up in price that same night. Cigarettes went up the next day. I mean, that's a big chunk of the population who wake up the next day. They won't feel their tax cuts until next February or March, but they feel the tax increases right away. So even on the politics of it, like I think there's just no imagination there. People, if you're going to spend that much money, you want to hope that people feel the benefit straight away, because by the time they do feel the benefit, they won't be thanking you for it. They probably won't even remember it was in the budget. They will, but they do remember if the next day they go to buy their pack of cigarettes and suddenly I think it's something like 17 or 18 euro now for a packet
Oh
maybe.
my God, it's funny you should mention that because I was out with some friends a couple of weeks ago, and I was going to the shop, and we were drinking in the Bath, actually, in Bath Avenue. And I went up to the Spar to get some Gaviscon, ironically. And one of the people that I was with was a smoker. She's like, "Oh, can you get me some cigarettes?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." Like, and she's like, "I'll give you money or I'll revolute you or whatever." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, don't worry about it." John, cigarettes are like 17 euro.
Yep. Yeah, I should say I know this because occasionally in my local shop I'm behind people buying them. I don't buy them myself. But I've
Euro.
seen them, and I also can tell you that I've been to the continent a good number of times this year, and they're €4 or €5 a pack there. So the price differential is just huge. And
But
maybe
like,
it's making a public health impact. I don't know if it is, but it's a tax that hits. I mean, smokers are disproportionately amongst the poorest classes in society, so you're screwing them immensely.
I mean, I just, I was shook. I couldn't, I don't know, like if that just crept up without me really paying attention to it, but like, I think I used to be a bit of a social smoker in my heyday. I think the last time I went in and bought a packet of cigarettes, they were probably €7 or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's extraordinary, and
That
no
just
one ever talks
rocketed
about
up
it.
by €1 every year while I wasn't paying attention, pretty
Well, it's
much.
75 cents this year, for example, so pretty much a euro every year they've gone up. And it's one of those things that like it does disproportionately target the poorest people in society, and everyone thinks it's fine because smoking's bad. I mean, smoking is bad, and maybe it will, maybe it's having a huge impact, but it's also having a huge impact on people who have an addiction, and can't shake it and have tried to shake it, and are being really heavily financially penalized. And by the way, it's driving the import of smokable cigarettes, which I think is almost as big as the drug trade in some parts of the country, at least.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a whole other show, as they say, John, the like the tax on food and cigarettes and alcohol and
Mm.
you know what I mean, like the nanny state and all that. We should get Keith on to have another rant about that. And
We
Keith
should.
is a dentist who absolutely despises smoking, and he still thinks, I don't know, €17 just like if you're talking about somebody who smokes and somebody that 10 and €15 a week makes a difference. God, and they don't quit smoking because it's too expensive. So, you know, anyway,
Anyway, we will leave it there on that note. We're sucking up to the smokers. We leave it there for another week. Hopefully next week, Sarah, the news will be better. Although I fear, looking at Sky News as I'm talking to you, that it probably won't be. But we live in hope that it will be a little bit better next week. But until then, from Sarah and from me, that was unfortunately the week that really was.